Hello, welcome to Fuse Coding. I'm your host, edA-qa mort-ora-y. This week we're going to be playing with one of the new features of Fuse, so let's get that open up right away so we can see what it looks like. This is something some of you may recognize from a while back, about maybe a month and a half or early January, whenever it was. I showed this exact demo as something I did for a Christmas hackathon at Fuse, and now this feature is live. Well, it's in the pre-release. It's 1.7 pre-release, which is now available on the website, and we're going to be playing with this a little bit today. I'm going to try and come up with a use case for this, but let me go through this first, and I'll show what it looks like, and then if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. That's what the show is about, and we're using Fuse. If you'd like to care to point anything out, feel free. Otherwise, I'm just going to start going through this. So this demo is coming from, I'm going to close that, from a hackathon, and what I want to do is, it's a relatively simple feature that has a lot of flexibility in the way it's used, and it has to do with the way this is done. Is that this is doing partial line drawing. It's drawing only little bits of the line, and the reason I did this first effect was that I'm getting tired of loading sites and animations that only just have one thing spinning, that you don't actually know if something's changing, or this makes it a little more interesting. You can see something's actually happening. It's not static. It's not just rotating. It's following the lines. So this was a very simple demo. It was one of the first demos I did with this new feature. And then I decided to put together a little bit more advanced feature, or I'd say more elegant feature of what this used, more artistic. And this is this growing one here. Now, if you understand what the feature is doing, it's really just drawing part of a path. When we get to this later, I can show you what it says. This it's not really that complex what this is doing. This is really just drawing four items. It's drawing a stem, it's drawing two leaves, and these leaves are actually the same, just rotated. And it's drawing this rose top, and these are just SVG path data. The interesting effect comes from the ability to draw part of the path at once. And you notice the middle line here is also swerving, maybe flowing in the wind, and these leaves are attached at a particular point. These are sort of minor feature variations of the way this works, and it's all part of a very simple feature. I mean, the surface area of this feature is very small, and we'll get to that soon. Let's look at the next one, because we didn't want to just have animations. We wanted to show practical purposes to this feature as well. And the one I could find very loosely is related to graphing. If you had a graph, if you notice this arrow, it's the first one, you may want to highlight it. So this one here, we have something called 1.5 release. This may be the time period for that release. Then if we do the post release, it slides over and shows a time period for that in a 1.6 warm-up. So this is a much more practical demonstration of this feature, and you notice the arrow actually follows the line, and importantly, the arrowhead points in the direction of the line. And again, these are very simple features in Fuse, and I mean simple that they have a very small surface area. And again, also these little dividers here, big things happen, is they're following off a particular point of this line. They're saying, well, where on this line drag it down? And this is very dynamic, so you don't have to program this. This could be a dynamic graph. I didn't get it to put in here. I'll be meaning to do a dynamic graph at some other point, but this one is showing the demonstration. But not to keep this too serious, I also added, a fun little extra to this graph. And this is also showing another one of the aspects, is that this new API, you can actually grab the direction, the tangent angle at any point in a curve, and this is what the little roller coaster is responding to, is the tangent angle, and that's how it's able to go across the graph. Again, this is not hard-coded. This could have been any graph here. I just didn't get a chance to animate originally. And the last effect, which a lot of people, or not a lot of people, a few people have asked for before, is that because we can partially draw any curve, well, then you can do stuff like this now. And I know this feature has come up in other places, and it's one of these sort of selling points of some font packages. They can produce this. Now this is really just a matter of, if you have the SGV path for anything, you can iteratively draw it however you'd like. Now there is another screen to this, and I like to get to that one back a little bit later, or maybe I'll just show it now. Is that, yeah, I just show it now. This shows the underlying aspect to the feature. Now, if you think back to that first screen there, we had this loading animation, and try to understand how complicated this is it's really not. I'll just show that bit there. It's a Celtic knot. It's this path. It's all it is. It's this image. It's hard-coded. Or not hard-coded, it's an SVG path data. And the feature really is just change the starting position. The starting position is the purple dot. And you can put this anywhere along the path. Where is that starting position? And it highlights green. And you can say the length. And that's where the offset of that last thing is in the arrow. And then there's just one additional function to get the side of that. And so all of these demos you've seen here are really just based on the same simple feature of this partial line drawing. And the way that's exposed in the API, if we look in the QA docs, you'll see on path, for example, and those ones are, I think, mostly using path. One of them is using curve. Curve and path both have this. They're both called something called a segmented shape. And they implement this feature, path end, path length, path measure mode, and path start. You can pretty much ignore the measure mode, that's just a technicality. And the path end and length, you use either one, and path start. And so there you have it. It's very simple. That's the API in a very sort of compact nutshell. And I guess Ahmed there, he kind of likes it. So you're welcome. And so what I'm going to do with today is, because this is the basic feature, there's not much to demo with it. I'm going to try and find one of the practical examples to it. And that would be wonderful, Diego. But actually, it was some of the Lottie demonstrations I saw which inspired me to do this, because I was thinking, those little curve animations, we're like so close. It's so close to getting this stuff that I thought I'd put it in. And that's why I did it in a hackathon. And so the basics are right there. And there's a couple of functions. I'll show you later what those functions are to actually get the tangent angle and a position along the curve as well as just drawing it. But that's the basic feature. And so let's look at a sort of practical example of how you might want to use this. We already saw the graphing. Now I want to do one that sometimes comes up. Sometimes, I'm going to say sometimes very lightly, and it is sort of a selection panel. It's if you want to have a dispatch, if you want to have a line chart, how could you use this feature in a sort of practical fashion? And I'll go through it. And I started setting this up before the show. The idea is you'd have, in this case, we have a bank transfer. You're going to transfer from some account to somebody, and the line's going to show who's connected. I didn't quite finish setting it up, so let's just quickly set that up, and then I'll show how we use the line in the middle, how we're going to animate this. And so I have all the code here. This will all go online. This is using the selection API to set up the basic selection, and we're going to stick a client panel on here as well and highlight this whole thing, because we're going to add a title here just to make it a bit more complete. Panel doc equals top, color equals FF, text value equals direct transfer. And the reason I'm showing this in the use cases, I often find it's become more useful to show these demos in the context of like a pseudo app. Because if you just see the animation, sometimes it's the idea like, well, how can I apply this animation to something I might actually want to do in my app? So if I show it this way, at least we have some ideas. And so the first part here is we may want to have, we have the basic selection, and getting the position for these lines is kind of an issue. It's kind of a pain. We don't have an API for this little bit yet. I mean, it's there, and so it's kind of yucky, but that's okay. So you can see this client position here. I hope I can do these in multiple lines. I can. Okay. So what this calculation here is because what I'm doing is the middle part is a curve, and it's down here. And this curve has to be represented in relative values. And I realize this would be a lot easier if I supported sort of absolute values. And I think I'm going to go after this and add that feature because it'd really make this a lot easier and it'd be a lot more flexible. But for now, we're doing a workaround. We have to figure out from where we want the line. And we'll use a bunch of expressions here. It may look inefficient, but it's really only efficient if you're animating the object itself, not the line, because this is fairly static. And we're going to say we want this from the height. And so all I'm really saying is positioning, where do I want this line? And so now you can see it comes from the middle of this side at least, so at least we have that side correct. And now we have to do the right side as well. And once I have set that line up, we're going to put a curve in it, and then I'll show you how to animate that. It's the position right value. And what I'm setting is here is in these items, the way I'm doing this is when the item is selected, I'm modifying one of these let values. And we saw in one of my earlier shows, this was a new feature in 1.6 that you can arbitrarily declare values to use for UX, for UI animation, UX values wherever you want, without having to go to JavaScript. And that's very valuable if you have data that's not really part of your model, but you need to work with on the screen. In this case, it's hard to say which part's part of the model or not. I'm doing this mainly in UX. We have a little bit of backend here for the state that just shows those little items, just to show that it's dynamic, that it's not actually hard-coded, because that would be cheating. Okay, so the position right value, I'm going to add right, that's correct, the top one's correct, and plus height item divided by 2, and I think this puts the item in the right place. So now when we connect them, you notice that my initial setup, I don't have the default set up yet. This is where the data bindings come in. What is the default selected item? And I don't quite have that yet, and maybe if it gets bothersome, we can add that back in. The next change I make. Now this line doesn't have a curve, which is kind of unfortunate. We kind of like to have a curve. The default is curved because there's only one segment you don't see a curve, and that's because of the basic default tangent calculation. So now you might have curve point here. We're going to say tangent, and the tangent here is going to be a horizontal line pointing towards the right, so that's going to be 1, 0. And the tangent on the other side is going to be the same thing. Alright, and you see, by forcing tangents on this, we actually get the curve into this now. Anybody working with, obviously, vector illustration will understand what these tangents are. If not, just imagine this line has a little line pointing across it, and that shows you where the tangent is. This one's all public, and I haven't committed this part yet, but let me get the link for that. So Ahmed's asking about that repository, so where is this thing? So Fuse Demos is the place where I'm putting all of my streams. So everything in my streams is going to go in here. And I'll upload this one at the end of the show. And this one will be under, I think, Stream. And it's going to be inside here, I think. I don't know, when I commit it later, we'll see what name I gave it. But it'll be inside this stream area. And the demo will be in there. And I'll put the link again later with the actual show out. And so this is where all the code is for all my demos. I put them in here, so they're all available. And if you saw a previous show, you would have seen the de Casteljau one, which actually shows the principle used behind this animation one, where I did all the math. And as again, even though the surface area of this API is relatively small, there's a lot of code behind it for this, and it was mainly just a lot of math and matrices and basic simple splitting, linear algebra type stuff. So let's go back here. So now we have this curve. And we want to say, well, what's so special about this curve? We don't, you know, what do we want to do with this curve? Well, the first thing is you notice when we had nothing selected, it was pointing to the middle of nowhere. And so it's like, how do we fix that? How can we get something there working so that when we select it, it goes over to the right one instead? So it only shows up as needed. So let's change something first. Let's make this animated and say, what is the default length? We're going to say, I even forgot what I called the option. So let's go to here. Path length. Now these values are all relative to 0 to 1. So we're going to say path length is 0. And that's going to make the curve basically disappear. And it's like, well, I have no curve anymore. There's nothing here. And so what happens there? So, and now I'm going to change, I'm going to put a value on here, UX name equals, I'll just call it link. And we're going to say, now we want both values. We want both values to have something selected. And we want to say, like, how do we detect if something's selected? So let's just simplify something on the right. We're going to put a bool here, let bool value equals false, UX name equals right selected. There are other ways to do this, but this is the one I have at the top of my head, while true value equals right selected. We're going to change link.pathLength to be 1, which means the path covers the whole thing with a duration of 0.1 I'm going to put duration of 1. So it's like really ridiculous. It's really long, but it helps show it a bit better. And in the while selected over here, we're going to change. Okay, I got an error over there, but that's okay. You're going to change. What is it going to be? Change. I'm trying to think of a change. Yeah, sorry. Right selected dot value equals true, and that will be changed right away. Okay, now I have an error, and let's see what that error is. Cannot parse right selected as bool. All right, that's correct. This has to be. Right. So now what happened? We cleared this all off. So I select the first one, and we have no path yet. The idea here is that we're not going to show the path until we actually select the one on the right. So let's see, let's hope this, fingers crossed, see if we got it right. Let's select, we're going to transfer from the credit card to our brother. And there we go. Now we have the path animated, and that's much nicer than the path just suddenly appearing. It's sort of animated. And the question is, could we actually get this to do the reverse? What would happen if we got the reverse here? That's a bit different, but it would work. And so let's see if we can get everything. And we can't unselect something now, but maybe that would be an option in the program. You want to unselect. So in my selection, I have a max count of 1. Let's set a max count to 0 instead, and that'll allow us to turn items on and off. Except something weird is going to happen here now. And you'll see it when I go over here. So I can select, and if I tap again, it apparently it doesn't, so I screwed something up in my selection. My toggle selection doesn't appear to be working. Max, oh, I screwed up, I put the wrong one. Max count should be 1. Min count has to be 0. Sorry about that. Our error message actually counted it. And you see the line goes to the middle of nowhere, but then it unwraps. And the middle of nowhere is actually 0, 0. So now if we go to Shady Guy, it'll animate again. But if we go away, it throws it away. And that's because we're using these values here, these let values, and we're using a change to change them. And then this is kind of a problem. This is going to be a little bit difficult to fix, because what we really want is the last one selected. What happens when it's selected? We want to set those values. We want to set those values instead of changing them. So, selected. We're going to do this. Instead of putting it in the change, we're going to put it in the selected. So we make this a permanent change instead. While this one is selected, or when it's selected, let's update this value. And that means when it's unselected, we can't undo that operation. It's fixed. You can't undo a, sorry, this is supposed to be a set. You can't undo a set like a change. So now when we go here, and it's going to go across, and then when you unclick it, then it goes back. Now that one wasn't so convincing because you didn't get to see the curve. So we do this one, we go to Parents, and then we go over here and you can unselect it. Now if you select in the middle, it's going to suddenly jump, but there's not much we can do about that right now. So this does the curve back and forth. So this would give kind of a nice connection here that, hey, look, it's connected. Great, you're connected. And what you may want to do with this is to say, okay, it's connected. And so, well, at the end of this while true, why don't we say, make another value here. Let bool value equals false, UX name. I'm going to call it connected. Then we can highlight the UI a little bit more, and we'll do this right at the end of this while true. We're going to say change connected.value true, and you're going to put a delay of 1. Now what I want to do is the curve, I'll put this down here, is the stroke color of this curve. Once it's connected, let's give it a different color. Let's say connected. And I don't know what color to give it. Let's give it a, well, let's give it the 0 color and say it starts with a half color. So it starts with, we might have to put these as strings because it wants to, I don't remember anymore. Let's see. So we'll start with a light color so you can sort of see it connect, and then see what happens when it disconnects. So it's light, and then it goes dark. So now we can combine these two effects together that you don't really have, and you can show that the connection is made. So now you can see how the UX would help to show, look, I'm trying to make this connection. And if you were really clever here, if you actually had a back-end connection that had a multi-step process of something actually happening, like looking up the record, you could have, for example, a pause in the middle of it and go, or slowly, and try to, and so by the time it gets over here, it's actually done the back-end processing and it's connected. Now this is one of the features we have, so we can move this around. If you're wondering, well, could I animate the transition here too? Yes, but I won't show that right now. Is you could actually put a tract on these things here, and you could attract these things up and down instead, and that would change that animation as well. And I mean, I don't really like the selection color here either. I would change this, but this is very neutral right now. We'll keep it neutral. And that'll unhighlight it there. And we're not allowed to unselect this side. That's fine. There's no reason you wouldn't have an account selected. But now let's add another effect to this line. Let's say the point of this transfer is you actually want to transfer money across. I mean, how much money do you want to transfer across? Let's assume it's somewhere else. And let's put a little transfer button at the bottom. And we'll just fake this for now. And this text at the very bottom was just to show a debug, to show where those locations are, and I can probably remove it now. Debug to show locations of elements. Now we have an issue that this whole top thing was kind of a panel and it was stuck together, and we should probably keep it as a panel. This panel full here was at the top, and I'm not sure quite how to set this up now. We have to divide the screen. So whenever we have a screen, we're going to make it a dock. No, we're going to make a dock panel around this. Actually, since we're already in a client panel, we're going to dock this to the top, and I'm going to indent this whole thing to keep the indentation aligned up. And now we'll add a button down at the bottom. Rectangle stroke width equals 1. Now I really need a library. What he shows, we have a library in the premium libs. It has standard buttons and stuff. I think it's called the Alive Toolkit. But since I'm not always using premium libs, I'm going to I keep creating buttons on the fly, and it means we always have basic buttons. I apologize for that. Our buttons are always going to be very basic in this show. Corner radius equals 10, and we'll try to give it the same. In this time, we might want to give this one a color, a very light color, EF. Text alignment equals center. And we'll say transfer. Alright, so we probably make that button a bit smaller. Put a padding on this. Padding equals 10. Margin equals 10. Alignment equals... I'm just going to throw top center for now. I'm not focusing on the show. So now we have a transfer button. And what we should do is we should actually have this grayed out. So we can actually use the same connected thing. Except you have to be careful. These let values, since they're inside a panel, they're relative to that panel. So we're going to move all of these out to be in the client panel, so we can access them here as well. And so this connected thing here, we're going to do the same thing with the color. We're going to modify the color if it's not connected. So color, say connected, make it this blue color. Otherwise, we're going to make it, we're going to shade it out otherwise. You can't do this unless it's shaded out. Now it's a bit weird to do. I don't know what the correct feedback color here is. Making it dark doesn't really make it look like it's unclickable, I guess. You should probably make it lighter, or make the stroke color. Actually, the stroke color makes more sense. These are very quick design decisions. I mean, suitably, it's not necessarily... Yeah, so this probably works better, and we'll just keep the inside. Otherwise, we'll keep the inside uncolored. So it has a slightly lighter colored border. You can't see it as well. That kind of, you'd want to probably indicate the whole text color here as well, or maybe make the whole thing opaque. But in any case, when something is connected, it'll be ready for transfer, and then we can click the button. And what we want to do is show an animation that might visualize this transfer. If you love that pseudo IT stuff they do in shows, on Hollywood shows, TV shows, where you go to the bank transfer and it shows transferring the money, we know in reality it doesn't happen, but it makes a nice visual effect. And if you are doing conformations, again, I would actually key this to real conformations in the back end, saying, look, if you initialize it, make it sort of go to the animate to the middle and wait there. Wait until you have confirmation. And when you have confirmation, you can animate to the end. And that would be a very good visual indication for the user that, look, it actually worked. It went through. I would not recommend doing this if you don't actually have that connection, because if you show it actually connecting and then it fails, that will actually distract the user and make them wonder, what are you doing? Why did that happen? Okay, so now when this clicks this, we're going to do a few weird things here. We're going to put a little color thing on that curve. So what do we have to do? We're going to put a circle on here somewhere. And what color do you use in Hollywood? I don't know what color to use. Let's use a shiny yellow, bluish color. Let's use a yellow color. It's relatively small. Actually, we're going to make it bigger than it probably should be. And we're going to have to anchor it right in the middle. Anchor equals 50%, 50%. And where does this go now? It's going to go somewhere random. It's going to go right here, right in the middle of this top panel, nowhere important. And we can already, it just happens to line up. We can already see that that's too light of a color, so we either have to put a border on it or make it a brighter color. So let's put a border on it. The purpose of this, and I'm going to put it above here so it's on top of the curve. The purpose of this is we're going to animate it going from left to right with the transfer. So we're going to give it, we don't have to give it a name, but it needs to have a position. So what position do we need it to have? This is where it gets a little bit interesting. Well, we need to know where it is. We're going to have another float here. I see once you start getting this stuff, you start having a lot of these things in the UX level that had to go to JS before. Let float value equals 0. UX name equals transfer position. And so that's where we're going to position this thing, at the transfer position. Now, you could stick it directly on X, and we're just going to do that because it's the easiest option. It may not be the best one for speed. And the X is going to be path position at distance, and this is where it gets weird, and the path is the link path, and the distance is whatever I just called that thing, transfer position. Transfer position. Now this returns a relative value, so it's going to be between 0 and 1, which means it's not what we want. We need it to be the position of the whole thing times width of what we call it full, times the full width. And I admit, we could probably make this a little bit better, add more APIs for this to simplify this. And so that's where the X is. And initially it's going to be at 0, or it's going to give me an error. I mixed something up here with... Okay, that error usually means when I have something wrong like that. Oh no, I actually don't need that. Times width full. Now I have to actually figure out where my error is. It's always hard to read this over the screen. It's really small. UX function found path position at, oh, path not position, path point. Sorry. And this is one of the core APIs for this new feature. So the position is 0. Yeah, there is supposed to be parentheses there. So this is actually a function called path position at distance. And that is, well, wherever that path is at distance. And the distance is currently 0. So you see if we have something selected, it should have gone to 0. Let's just finish this off with the Y position as well and see where it is. Actually, you know what? This path point is not relative. I don't remember anymore. It might actually be the value because I already said transfer. We'll find out. I've forgotten whether it's relative or not. Okay, and this path point gives you the point on the curve at this value. So wherever this value is, path point gives you the point there. But for the x, we only want x. And for the y, we only want the y. We don't have index looks up, use the x and y functions. And this was supposed to be used in another feature I had. There was another feature that was supposed to have position where you could combine these two together and it'd be a lot easier. But that feature hasn't made it yet because of a backwards incompatibility we have in UX with it. Once that's resolved, we'll get this position in place and it'll make that easier. And so you can see the little circle there, and it just sort of follows the place. We may not want to show it right away. And the issue we have now is that, well, we want to animate it across. And so you notice here, we're just referring just to this transfer position. Nothing else. Just transfer position. So when the user clicks, what we can do is we can do change. And these values up here, transfer position dot value equals 1. We want to go, because this is referring to the position along the path between 0 and 1, wherever the path happens to be. And we're going to do duration equals 1, and a duration back of 0. And we're going to do two things as well. We're going to say change, and this little dot needs a color. Call it transfer dot. Transfer dot visibility is visible. And we'll change that right away. And we'll set the visibility equals hidden. So it's not there by default. So it's not there. And you see it's not there. We have the first transfer. And when we click transfer, then the dot comes and it transfers the value across. And you can click this multiple times. And now you can see the value go across. You can add a whole bunch of these ones too if you want. You can add more, but that's the basic animation here that we have, this value going across. And because it's all relative, if you happen to click changes in the middle of it, it's just going to follow the path wherever it was. And because it's always relative to the path. So now we have this pseudo transfer function, and you could trigger this from JavaScript as well, and that would give you tie it to your actual transfer, so you can have it pause in the middle. And so that's always very relative. And again, these shapes can be totally arbitrary for what happens. This path thing is a completely arbitrary shape. It doesn't matter what you do. A simple shape like this, it works. You can generate it on the fly from your code. If you had a flowchart, you could throw things going back and forth. Now, the actual thing you might want to do is you might want to show an arrow instead. Right? So instead of having this, let's put a little arrow in there. So transfer, we see, unfortunately you can still click transfer. We would actually, reasonably, you would disable this in the real UI until it's actually connected. And so let's say we want to show a little arrow in there. Like we want to have text inside that circle. How do we do that? Well, let's add some text. Text value equals, and let's grab one of those, our fun Unicode arrow friends. And by now you think I know the numbers of the basic arrows, but I never do. I don't like any of these arrows. I never liked the arrows from Unicode. I don't know why I insist on using them. You could use a graphic in this place as well, but and I actually do in the other demo, I use an actual graphic, but I want to show a little bit more here. Let's just grab this one. This looks fine. Now there's a reason why I'm choosing pointing to the left by default, because that's what's considered the zero rotation position, and it's good to have one work that way. Font size equals, let's say 20. Text color equals 000. Alignment equals center. And it's not really quite centered in this. The problem with using text is that it's hard to get the alignment correct here. So I'm going to increase the size of this thing again, just so it can fit a bit better. And we're just going to fudge it right now to get the margin equal 0, -5, just to try and get it centered. Because when things are so small, it's hard to get the text centered correctly. And obviously, fonts have their leading and their descenders, so you have to really play with it if you want it. So now we have this arrow going across, but it doesn't look so nice when it just sort of flips down here like blah. Okay? And so we want to make it follow the path. And it'll be more apparent if you do a path like this. And so how do we make it follow the path? Well, we add a second thing here. And I'm going to add it to the circle itself to show you that you can rotate the whole circle. And what we want is a rotation. Now, this is something unfortunate that also came up, is that we don't have a rotation that can just specify degrees. Or at least I never found one. Let me look that one up again. We usually work with rotate. Rotate has a degrees, but for whatever reason, the rotation class itself, it does have it now. I must have been dreaming. Whatever, let's use it. It makes it a lot simpler. Rotation degrees equals. Now, what do we want for the degrees? We need to know which way that line is facing. Which way is the line facing? And again, we said off to the right for that neutral position is 0. And so we don't have to think about much. We're going to take the path and the tangent angle, so this is for the tangent, at distance. And I'll go back in a second and explain what these individual words mean. And this is at transfer position. You want it rotated towards the gravity? Well, I'm going to make it rotated the direction it's going. Okay? Which it didn't this time. Something never saved or updated. Alright, something didn't pick up this rotation. That's a bit weird. I think that's just a reloading glitch. If I say 40... Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, no, I know. I know why the problem is here. We have degrees, but tangent angles. Everything to do with angles and animation, everything in here for consistency works in the radian system because it's consistent. If you have to call sine and cosine on it, you need to have radians. And so you can't just call degrees, you need to specify radians. And we don't have just a radians value, but we do have a Euler angle, which is actually the same thing. We have Euler angle, and the x and y are 0, and that'll actually rotate it. And so now you can watch the arrow actually follow the line. It's following the rotation. It's this minor effect, but you can still see it. And let's make the font size a bit bigger so you can see even better. A different arrow. I should have really chosen a different arrow. But I'm going to stick with this one for now. So this isn't a... So as Ahmed is, I don't know if the gravity meant the way it's pointing like down to here or following the line. If you wanted to point down to here, it's actually a simpler calculation. So now if you're going up instead, it'd go up. And so these are basically all the features that were programmed in this partial curve features. We have the actual partial curve drawing, which we saw when you do this. It has the partial curve, so it goes in and out. And then we have these two functions, the path point at distance and the path tangent angle at distance. And that lets you do these animations. Now everything I showed in the demo before is actually just using these very simple concepts, building all on top of this. And so when we had back here, we go back to this one, you can see this animation here is really just that one path. It's that one path. We're using curve in our current code, but this path works as well. And it's actually 8 paths layered on top of each other. So each color has 2 paths because a small line and a thick line, and these are just animating running through the path. So this is just that one feature, and this doesn't even use the functions. This is just using the path start and path length features. And it's just 8 paths layered on top of each other. And this flower, this has a curve in the middle. And it has these lines on the side, and it has one thing. So it consists of 3 paths and 1 curve. And this curve is slightly animated. And this code is over on, as I say, the code for that, wherever I put it. I need to copy my own link again. This one is over in the Bezier split one. Well, a horrible name for that demo, but that's the name it got. And this is actually this demo here. So this is this demo, all the code for it's there. For example, the load the growth one has this code, and there's a bunch of curves, and the curve and the path, and then I have the actual SVG data at the bottom. You see the SVG data is a bit verbose, but this is just exported for Inkscape. So I just loaded things in Inkscape, grabbed the SVG data and put it in here. And these now just have a series of little timelines and animators to set that up. And you can look at that code there. I can copy that one as well over here. So if somebody wants to look at it, they can grab that as well. Oh, let's put this one here like this. That's that demo. And so this is basically, you can build up a lot of features and a lot of little things based on it with animation. And you'll see how I use this let here as well. I use let values to facilitate animation between things, and I have whiles. The other ones use timelines. This one just uses click triggers. And so everything can hook together. And this was the key goal I wanted in this feature, was I wanted to find a way that this blends well into the rest of the feature set. And I think we found that. Very simple features. We have the stroke length and start that can be modified. And we have these functions. I mentioned I'd say what these functions are. So what does path, point, at distance mean? Well, the path part should be clear. It means given a path, and that's the first option, link. And link is, so it's actually a curve in this case, but it applies to path as well. And we chose path because we didn't want to say segmented shape here. Path is more natural for accessibility. And point as well, what point in this curve? And point literally means inside this element. Which point inside this element is this transfer position point referred to? And so when we go across, it's saying right at the start is 0, over here is 1, and the middle is 0.5. Give us the actual position on that curve. And then we have something called distance. This is an alternative to one called time. Now, if you've worked with Beziers before, you'll understand the Bezier algorithm is actually based on time. It's an expression of something t. And you can actually do that as well. I think I exposed time. And for a single curve, it's not going to make much of a difference at all, I think. It'll change the speed at which it goes. What happens in multiple curves, though, and most of this stuff probably takes place over multiple curves. The one curve example is when you have multiple curve segments, they're not all the same length. What time does is it evenly divides the time to reach those segments. So even if they're a different length, it's still going to take the same time to go over them. Whereas distance says, look, take the entire distance of the curve and let's try and maintain a consistent speed. So if you went across there, what would be consistent speed across? Now I must warn you, the current algorithm I use for this now is an estimate. It's a very rough estimate suitable for animation only. And the reason for that is calculating the exact distance and offsets along a Bezier curve is a very expensive operation. And until we find a way to trick it even further, we're going to go with a very, very rough estimate. If it actually comes up in the future that we need more precision, I can put a different distance mode, an option, and say trigger higher precise mode, and in which case it'd still be a very rough estimate, but it'd be, I guess, just less rough. And you trade off calculation time for the exact position. And so that's what distance means. Distance means if you have multiple segments to the curve, and that's the case in the demo here, these things have multiple segments, and it goes at a continuous distance, a speed. So the lines in the top here, they disappear at a constant sort of speed, even though they're going along multiple segments, and that's what distance means. And same with point, the curve here. We don't have to worry about how long the curves are. using the distance version says, let's go at a constant speed across the actual visual distance, not on the segments of it. And so when you look at these little drop hangers here, let's take off that for a second. These are using the same functions to figure out, well, I have this kitten effects. Something happened here, somebody loaded a kitten, maybe a coworker left unnamed that makes kitten sounds, decided at this point that he should release that. And so this is how you'd associate visual data with the graph, is you would use this path point at distance, and that would give you the pistons on the curve where this kitten effects happened. And then you could drop the line from it and say, well, it happened here. Same with the kings happened here. And this arrow one is using the tangent function. And so again, this is what our arrow was using here as well. The arrow moves up along that line, and it's using a path tangent angle. Now this is a lot of a mouthful, but for accessibility and searchability, I didn't want to reduce this too much because it's very important to understand what's happening here. Is again, it's path, that's a leader, and tangent angle. Now, again, if you worked in any of the illustration tools, you'll understand what tangent angles are. It's the line, if you draw a line tangent to the curve, basically which way is the curve pointing at each point. The reason why I didn't just say angle is because there are other angles. You might want the normal angle instead. We don't have that available yet, but tangent angle, so it's very clear. And then at distance again, because you could also have at time. And so that's basically the full feature describing exactly what it does, and that gives you the angle up there, and that's how we can assign it to a rotation. And again, this angle here is in radians. It's the natural unit for angles, and we don't want to duplicate every API to say tangent angle degrees. You just have to get used to using things that are in radians as well as degrees, or do the conversion. We have a function called radians to angles and stuff like this, radians to degrees. You can use those as well. Search for them in the docs, they're all there. And so those are the basic features that explains them, and hopefully doing it that you can create complex animations. And so seeing how that API works, it shouldn't be much of a stretch to understand how this final animation works for mort-ora-y. It's just going over, it's just one long curve. I wrote the text in Inkscape and I exported the curve, and then I just use an animation to go over it, and at the very end I fill it in. So I'm going to commit this. I don't think I have anything else to show on this right now. It's very hard to come up very quickly with a UI example where this might become useful. This connection thing, the connecting lines, obviously the line itself isn't something new, but this growing and shrinking is a new feature. You can grow and shrink it, and that sort of completes the story for lines. I'm hoping this completes the story for lines. There's probably a lot of minor features that come up. So as you guys start using this and you say, hey, look, this calculation is a little bit, iffy. I don't like this calculation. We can add more functions, but the core of this is done, and that should give us a lot of flexibility in how we do animations. It applies to path and curve. We could make it apply to more, but we thought to stick with those two because those are the most likely ones you can do. And curves can also be animated, and that was shown on the flower. You notice the curve is actually animated, and this partial application applies during the animation. So even though this is animated, it still managed to follow the path. Again, that's an important point, that the curves are animated and paths are not. Let's let that grow again. And so we have that little line going, and so the arrow follows the line. We didn't animate the transition between there. That could also be done, but that's not part of this. We just want to show the line effects. So I think that covers the basic line effects. I say this is available in the pre-release for 1.7, and it's available in the QA channel now, so it means it should be going out. If you make anything interesting with this, let us know, especially if you make something that represents a real world, like user case that's not just animation, because there's only so many places we can use this, and I'd really love to use them. I'd really love to see more examples of it. Obviously, animations are really cool too. We like them, and I'd like to see all of them. And again, if you're missing any small features, just let us know, because some of the small features aren't that costly, especially if it's just a UX function. They can be added relatively cheaply, and I'm glad this feature finally made it out. We did it in the hackathon first in December. It's been almost 2 months. And it took me a long time to formalize it, because getting the basics working and getting all the rough points cleaned out took a while. So I'm happy it's released. I'm happy that we have actual uses for this, and I'm very happy if people use this to implement their UIs. And I think that's it for the show. I thank you very much, and I'm going to sign off with this last one once again. Let's make this nice and big, and we'll sign off with this and say thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow me, retweet my stuff, everything you want to help get the name of the show out. And so we have more interest in it, it just keeps up the popularity of the show. And thank you very much for watching. Please download Fuse 1.7 and try this stuff out. I'll upload the code right away. And again, I'm edA-qa mort-ora-y as shown by this animation. Thank you very much.